Hello dear chess lovers, are you struggling against d4, c4 or knight f3? Today I will show you a system for black that might be helping you to get good results. We'll be talking about the reversed Botvinnik setup with black, also called the Wedberg System, named after Swedish Grandmaster Tom Wedberg, who liked to take those structures. What am I talking about, folks? I'm talking about this very structure. This can transpose from one c4, one knight f3, or simply symmetrical English, okay? It can even come from one g3, for example. There are different ways to transpose to the same structure. This is designed by basically Botvinnik English triangle setup. The idea is to get those pawns like a triangle on d6, c5 and e5, get the knight to c6, the other knight to e7, fianchetto our bishop on g7, followed by castling short. This is a very nice and solid structure for black. If you know what you're doing, if you deeply engage with the middle game plans, you can also win so many games. It's so much venom to this very structure. Almost like Botvinnik English with white, it's a system opening which you can employ against different first moves by white. Hence, the universal applicability. Let's talk about this structure, folks. It's, by the way, a very important game between Aronian with white and Alexander Grischuk with black in the Candidates Tournament 2011, the rapid portion. Okay, Grischuk liked to take this with black, Aronian liked to take with white, so it will be a great strategic struggle. We will deeply engage with those middle game ideas, folks. Well, let's talk about this d5 outpost, right? That's a weakness for us. By taking this triangle structure, we are accepting a weak square on d5. White would love to use that square with their pieces, hence the entire plan of knight e1, knight c2 and knight e3 by Aronian. That's a smart choice for white probably. He doesn't even push d3 yet, but transfers that knight as soon as possible to this d5 outpost. Okay, that's, let's say, to white's benefit. But we are accepting a weakness on d5. On the other hand, look at those pawns. There's a great grip in the center of the board, and we can even play for f5 or later b5 pawn breaks as black. Alright, so these are a couple of interesting ideas for black. Plus, this triangle structure can support an attack on the king side. I will show you so many motifs today involving an attack against the enemy king. Alright, folks, it's full of venom, and basically white goes knight e3. The idea is to quickly get a knight on d5. What do? We do queen d7. That's a great way to connect our rooks, and this repeats itself all the time. These piece placements behind these triangular forms, you must have seen this before, also with white, folks. That's what Grischuk gets, knight e d5. Well, already here, there are some ideas, if you give us all the time in the world, maybe to play d5 at some point. Maybe this will come with bishop h3 ideas. Maybe we can go f5, right? It's a very solid structure for black. Knight d5 is on the board. Here comes my question. Blunder check, please. Can we take that knight? Like with our knight? No. Very basic blunder check. You see a pawn fork option. I'm also showing you some nice tactical patterns so you avoid such traps. Okay, folks? So, given this orientation phase, tell me about this idea of bishop h3. Do you think that's a good move for black, or we don't need it? Folks, Grischuk goes on and plays the move bishop h3. That's a very safe move because this knight is protected by the guy on c6, so we don't blunder anything after those captures. Why does he do this? Because he has some ideas for attacking the enemy king on the king side with f5 and f4 and so on. And this king has been slightly weakened after the bishop trade. That bishop was also a good bishop for white, if you think about that, controlling the key d5 square, exerting pressure on this diagonal. So it makes sense for black in those structures to go ahead and trade those bishops. Alright, very interesting structure. White wants to go b4, a3 and b4 and expand on the queen side. Alright, that's a very common idea for white. But we have a very solid structure. We can even play b6 and basically ask white to show us something on the queen side. Grischuk plays rook a c8, also a logical move. There are different treatments of this position. e4 is a very committal move by Aronian. It's a very committal move. He sort of wants to stabilize his knight on d5 and well, control some key squares. Maybe also if we go f5, sometimes they can take on f5 as well. So here comes my first question for you folks. All right, here comes my first question to you. He takes on d5, Grischuk takes on d5, after knight takes d5, here comes my question. Do you think we should go to d4 with our knight or to e7? All right, just a strategic decision right now, talking about outposts. White has an outpost on d5, black has an outpost on d4. It's a symmetrical structure right now with triangles for both sides. But do you think we should go to d4 directly? You're a great player if you say no to knight d4 and play the move knight e7. This move challenges white's strong knight on d5. This is the only piece for black that can challenge that beast on d5, and Grischuk does that because he basically is okay with a draw in this position if white, let's say, takes and then play those moves. Although it looks like a drawish position, I would say, you know, there are still chances. After takes, we can sometimes go f4, sometimes e4 to activate our bishop. The game is still very rich actually and complex, even in those middle games, right? So Aronian doesn't exchange the knights. If you go to d4 directly with the knight, folks, this is risky because this allows bishop e3. They can challenge our knight on d4, but our bishop cannot challenge that knight on d5. And if you're careless, you allow this transformation and you're left with a bad bishop versus an amazing knight on d5. That's a scenario that you must avoid. Hence, the strategically rich middle game. All right, I'm showing you these things just so that you don't blunder strategically with those piece exchanges. I made a Chessable course about this, the art of exchanging pieces. That's exactly why he chooses knight e7, because the idea is to exchange off white's best piece. Aronian keeps the knight on the board, Grischuk repeats. Aronian goes bishop e3, Grischuk engages in this typical pawn break, right? That's also what we are playing for. Given our very secure central control, right? We have green lights to push on the flanks. Usually f5 is a very good idea. Sometimes you can also play for a6 and b5 as mentioned. Aronian plays a committal move f3. Well, it's also very hard to say a plan for white. What should white play? It's difficult actually to execute it. Already here there are some ideas like f4, by the way, folks. If white is careless, we will go f4 on the next turn. It resembles a King's Indian structure, in fact, right? If you look at those pawns, this also is the same pawn formation in the King's Indian defense. Put that pawn back to c7, we are talking about the typical King's Indian pawn formation. The pawn being on c5 doesn't change much. We still want to push and attack the white king on g2, which has been weakened after the bishop trade. Okay? So white has to be a little careful here. He goes f3 and Grischuk goes f4. A very typical pattern in the Wedberg system, in the Botvinnik reverse. If they ever take, then this is great for our bishop, folks. Look at this. The art of awakening pieces. By going f4, your bad bishop wants to awaken. That's a very typical motif you must know in this structure as black, right? Hence, f4 is a very good move in this position. Of course, Aronian doesn't take it. He retreats with bishop g1. But now the King's Indian pawn formation is there, the pawn chain. And obviously we are playing on the king side with pushes like h5 and g4 in the end, and Grischuk directly goes h5, right? That's beautiful. Our pawn chain is pointing towards the king side and the play is on that side of the board. The idea is to make it more difficult for white to push and close down everything with g4. If given time, black will play g5 and g4, open up lines against the white king and crash through on the king side. Notice he never jumps to the outpost because that trade only favors white. Knight d5, for example, if I ask you, should we go knight d4? No, right? Because that's a great strategic blunder. And here again, white's a beautiful knight on d5 versus a bad bishop on g7. You want to avoid that. So that's exactly why Grischuk finds the most flexible and typical move, rook f7. Well, a couple of ideas, right? I want to control that knight fully as well, but also want to double up my rooks on the f-file because I know something's going to open up on the king side very, very soon, right? Piece placement in the middle game, given the pawn structure. Here Aronian makes a move that is very committal, right? It's a very committal move, g4. If he waits, the problem is this, folks. If he waits, then rook f8 anyways. And if white ignores us, then we can close down everything on the queen side with b6. It's not easy at all for white to create anything on the queen side if they try queen a4. So if queen a4 is on the board, folks, I'm going to show you a very interesting motif. Here black goes h4. The idea is this: if you take my pawn, you tell me the finish. You tell me the finishing blow for black, folks. Can you see the queen on a4? Unprotected piece. There are some discover attack options like this. How do we set up a discovered attack? That's my question to you. And you're a great player if you found the move rook takes f3. The idea is after takes, you see, now the knight can move with check on the king and we will win the queen on a4. It's an extremely lovely little tactical sequence. There is also a recurrent pattern in those structures. Notice after h4, it's collapsing for white on the king side. There are all these ideas like this. It's very difficult to defend. That's exactly why Aronian went g4, folks. The problem is after takes. Now this is weak. You open the h file for our pieces. This pawn has become a protected pass pawn. Plus, this knight can later access this g5 square. So our attack is raging. Rook f8 by Grischuk hints at f3. Thus, Aronian is defending against this threat. The problem is the queen is very passive, and later on that queen will be targeted by moves like this even, and removing the blockade. It's a very difficult position. Bishop f6 is a great strategic move, folks. He wants to simply do this: rook f7 and bishop h4. If ever white plays bishop f2, well, this bishop wants to trade off itself with bishop h4. That's a great multi-purpose sequence for black, right? Bishop f6 followed by rook f8-7 hints at bishop h4, and we are trading off our bad bishop for white's good bishop. Notice how we are playing around that knight. That knight looks beautiful optically, but that's white's only good piece, and it's not harmless at all. So you should just defeat these phantom fears about this knight and look at the bright side for black's position. So much so is that Aronian is forced to take that bishop with the knight. Otherwise, this was a huge threat, right? Bishop h4 is on the board. Now, other knight is coming to g5. As mentioned, look at this. Knight e6 to g5, and the game is completely over. The queen needs to move. Comes f3, crashing attack on the king side. Given all of our pieces, folks, just look at those black pieces on the king side. Extremely lovely. Knight on d5 has no influence against this attack. Lovely sequence. That's exactly why Aronian sadly goes for this trade. That amazing knight is traded off for a terrible bishop. Of course, that's a great exchange for black. He wants to defend the position, but it's just impossible. g5 also stops h4 business. It's a beautiful position for black. And here comes the next phase. So after h3, notice white has no attacking chances whatsoever. They want to simply passively defend this position. And Grischuk starts to slowly maneuver his knight to a better pasture on e6. He's anticipating at some point a move h4, and after takes, this knight will be going to g5 and with a crashing advantage. Notice the bishop is completely paralyzed in this pawn chain. Black's pawns are completely shutting down that piece. King f1, and here comes my question. One weakness is already created on the king side, but white wants to simply wait and do nothing. Black is creating the second front to win this position. Please stop the video and tell me the winning plan for black. And you're a great player if you come up with the move b5. He wants to simply push on the king side, create a second front, and improve their pieces on the a file and win this position. This game is so lovely. There are still so many pawns left on the board, right? It's like late middle game, and white is completely paralyzed. Zero activity. They are waiting for the final push on the queen side. Look at this. Rook b8, black is taking his time, white is shuffling. b4, why? Because his idea is to go a4 next, use the hook pawn to open up lines, create a weakness on b3 and win. This is a beautiful game, folks. You should really study this game deeply. And after this rook a8, for example, this is coming with tempo after takes. White has nothing. Aronian keeps on waiting. Grischuk improves his position. Such ideas also exist. Black is not in a hurry, folks. I'll quickly show you how the game went. It's just so bad for white. This is the first weakness, second weakness, third weakness. Look at the pieces. Just a terrible position, right? So here he improves the queen as well. Presses on a2. The queen can sometimes invade like that. It's a difficult position. That's why Aronian must create something with h4. But this is exactly why our knight is positioned nicely, right? If you ever take on g5, our knight is coming to g5. Prophylaxis in its purest form, which means white cannot even create anything on the king side. He improves his position. For example, if he takes after knight takes g5, this queen is completely shut down from the game. There are ideas like f3 to follow after that, and black is completely winning. So that's why Aronian tried queen f1, folks. Very passive as well. Puts more pressure on d3. Black's position just collapsing. Rook c1 hits the queen, of course. Just a disastrous position, folks. Just look at this. Knight takes g5. If queen h4 comes a knight fork, knight f3. That's why the queen cannot improve. This rook is terribly placed. This bishop is terrible. And look at the black pieces. The story is basically so clear. Black is a winning advantage. And after queen h3 check, he's trading off the queen's folks. And he's transitioning into a completely winning pawn endgame. Aronian resigned. For example, I take, and this position is completely winning. Look at those pawns. V4 victory in the end for Grischuk, right? What is this? Like V-shaped pawns, and it's a beautiful winning position for black. It's an extremely lovely game that deserves careful study. Couple of key lessons from this game. See how the entire game he let a knight on d5 and he played around that piece. How he never allowed his knight to be traded off for this bishop, right? And how he in the end find the plan of exchanging off his bad bishop for the opponent's good bishop. Even this trade paved way for an attack against the white king. Finally, a very typical pattern of how f4 was hinting to activate the bishop, but if you don't accept the gift, then after h5, those pawns are slowly rolling on the king's side like a king's Indian structure. And that's a practical advantage of the system, because we are attacking the enemy king. Practically, it will be difficult for the white players to play these positions. From first-hand experience, I know it's very difficult for white players to accurately defend those structures. It's coming, those pawns are coming. We have a clear plan, as Grischuk has demonstrated in this game. Even rook f7 is a very typical idea, followed by rook f8. Even, right, later on this rook switched to h7. It's a multi-purpose move, by the way, right? Another typical piece placement to be remembered for its opening. Now I will show you another instructive game from the same structure. See, it comes from symmetrical English. You can start with c4, c5. There are different ways to transpose to the same structure. The idea is to at some point play e5, of course, as in this case, and have a full grip on those dark squares, and then choose this location for our knight, and we have Botvinnik's triangle in our hands, right? Bishop e6, very nice move, controlling d5, also setting up the move queen d7. So there are different move orders, but usually we transpose to the same position. Rook b1 is very typical. White wants to go b4, open up lines and place a play on the queen side, just like in the king's Indian defense. And even here, right, he goes bishop h3. We've seen this one from Aronian Grischuk game. The idea is the same. We have attacking chances on the king side later. This bishop is a great piece, and trading off that piece should not be a bad idea for black. In this case, they take on h3 and the queen appears on h3, folks. Not that we can give mate directly, but still we have this long-term plan of pushing our pawns on the king side. b4, very similar motif. b6, everything is locked on the queen side. It's difficult for white to create a weakness on the queen side. That's the other advantage of this pawn formation. Look at this. Rook d8 is supporting at some point pushes like d5. It's so flexible. We can play different ways with our pawns. Queen f3, queen e6, controlling this d5 square, hinting at f5. The queen is nicely placed. e4, again, it's a very committal move, but they want to simply activate their pieces and also the bishop. But of course, this allows us to push f5, right? It's a very typical idea. f5, almost like a king's Indian. Sometimes we can go f4 and create this storm on the king's side. I think we are coming there very, very soon, folks. For example, the best move for black in this position was to go f4. Look at this move. Buries the knight, buries the bishop, and if you ever take my pawn, I'm awakening my terrible bishop like that. That's a very typical, pervasive king's Indian motif. There are already threats like this, f3 followed by queen g4. So white needs to be so careful to defend this position. So f4 was a very, very useful move to remember. He plays rook f7, just like Grischuk, right? See how typical plans are executed in those games. f3, h5, just like in a Grischuk game, he's anticipating the move f4, and he's anticipating the response g4, and that's why this pawn is nicely placed on the h5 square. You see so many typical motifs and patterns that I've shown you before. For example, black to play, please tell me the move Yes, now he goes f4, folks. The idea is that if you ever take my pawn, then my terrible bishop is becoming a great piece. Look at this bishop, right? Look at this bishop. Now you also gain this e5 outpost for your knight, by the way. Beautiful, beautiful. So this means you cannot take my pawn, but then I have free hand on the king side to roll my pawns. White wants to create a weakness on b6, but their attack on the queen side is simply too slow. Now the game resembles a real King's Indian battle, you know, where white's attack on the queen side is basically not coming anytime soon, but black is very close to the push g4 in his position, right? Rook a1, he wants to finally invade with the rook and so on, but g4 is on the board, right? Look at those pawns, guys. Very typical motif. He takes and black recaptures. White plays rook a7. Well, if you take twice, folks, this is the problem, right? Look at our beautiful bishop. Our bishop is awakened if you ever take on f4. That's why they can't do it. Rook a7 is on the board in this case. And black simply wants to go rook f8 and exert pressure on the queen side. Here comes my question. What was wrong with the move f3? Many beginners will play the move, hey, I'm creating an protected pass pawn on f3. What can be wrong with this move? Well, first of all, you're awakening that bishop. Second of all, you're awakening that knight. Is now ready to go to f5 or d5. Third of all, your attack is closed down on the king side, right? Your goal is to open up lines against the white king. By pushing f3, you're closing down the king side. It's actually a subtle chess crime. f3 looks so beautiful optically, but strategically, it is a bad move. After queen f2, for example, they are getting ready to get that knight into a much more active post. That's exactly why, folks, he doesn't push, but he plays rook f8. It's a beautiful and nice illustrative moment, folks. He goes b5 to simply fix the pawn as a weakness. Now black takes on g3. Bishop a6 was even stronger, exerting full pressure over here, defending that pawn, hinting at f3 at some point, sometimes just takes, and also, right, opening up the h-file business for the rook, just in case, right? The bishop will be a better piece, because the bishop is now not doing much on this square. That will be the point. But he takes on g3 in this position. Well, a little bit premature perhaps, but white needs to be so careful to basically prove their point. In this position, for example, queen h2 was the only move for white to play this position. They need to also find the move bishop g5 to maybe have an okay game, right? But it's difficult in a practical game to play like that. He plays king takes h2, and after rook takes f7. If you look a little bit deeper to this position, still black has very good pieces. Knight g6 to f4 is coming at some point. This king is less safe than the black king, and white pieces are not shining in this position. Bishop g5, bishop f6 was chosen, but queen g6 was actually winning the game on the spot. It's a beautiful move, folks. If you take my knight, the point is this. First I go g3, followed by rook f2, and the game is completely over. For example, rook f2, you see the point? You see that beautiful rook that is coming to the game? They need to even sacrifice the queen to survive in this position, folks, right? Not to mention these ideas to follow. It's a game over position for white. Look at their king. That was the point. Queen g6, and black is winning. Practically difficult to defend this position with white. In the actual game, he played the move bishop f6, and white couldn't find all the good moves. In the end, black pieces are coming to the king side. You see, there are so many threats facing the black king. Even the knight is now coming to the party. Just look at the black pieces, folks, on the king side. This king is very safe, and white is completely lost, actually. Knight f4 hits the queen. Knight h3 check. Rook f2 is coming. Look at this, folks. Just game over. White will resign very, very soon. King g6. The king is very safe. He wants to maybe induce such ideas, but black is finishing off the task with this check, and white will resign very, very soon in this position, folks. I don't know why the game is still going. Yes, here the white player resigned. Just to show you the dangers waiting white in those structures, I will show you this middle game position between a game between Aronian and Nisipeanu. Aronian was only 16 years old when this game was played. He was still a very strong player, but his rating was 2450. Okay, so in this case, we have the same Botvinnik triangle structure. White gains space on the queen side, but it's not clear where it's going next. And here, Aronian chooses a very committal move again, e4. How should black respond to this move, folks? Please stop the video and try to implement the lesson I taught you today. You're a great player if you came up with the move f4. Typical reaction also in the king's Indian defense. The idea is to sacrifice a pawn for the moment, but to awaken our bishop, awaken our knight. Just look what has changed. Black played f4. This bishop is bad, this knight is bad, but after this transformation, this bishop is amazing, and this knight also has access to this e5 square. We also weakened the enemy king on g1, right? Aronian took the pawn, but it's actually quite a dangerous position for white. He doesn't even bother taking on h4. He first pins that defender on f3, and black's attack is raging on the king side, right? There are so many weaknesses. White is to be so careful. In the end, Aronian collapsed. He took the knight, the main defender of the king disappeared. Also the squares, dark squares, has been weakened after that knight has been traded off, right? It's a beautiful trade. Here comes the move, knight e5. That's exactly was his point. He sacrificed the pawn. He doesn't even bother grabbing the pawn. It's not about the pawn. It's about piece activity. It's about dynamism. It's about attack against the white king, folks. Please focus on those pieces for black and understand the real dynamics in the position, right, on the king side. Very typical motif in this Wedberg system, basically. Yeah? It's a very exciting system, actually. Bishop e2 wants to control that knight. The problem is now black can grab the pawn, and there are so many ideas later on, right? Sometimes bishop g5 is an option. The queen will come to the king side, and it's just a very difficult position for white. Aronian goes wrong with another move, bishop h6. You tell me, folks, black to play. Can you find the only winning move in this position for black? That's a lovely little move. Bam! Rook f3, right? It's a beautiful Shirobian move. You can never take my rook, of course, because of this fork. Otherwise, I'm stopping you in pushing f3. Your king is caged on the king side. Sometimes there are ideas like rook h3 even, and my pieces are slowly coming to the king side. It's a lovely little move. White has nothing to show against this move. Beautiful knight, beautiful rook, beautiful pieces. He tried bishop f4, folks, but it's difficult, right? It's a very difficult position. Simple queen d7. He wants to come here and give a mating attack to the white king. You still cannot take my rook because of the fork, right? That doesn't work. And well, if you ever take my knight, folks, then queen g4 check. That's a game continuation, by the way. Well, king h1 was chosen. If you try bishop g3 here, folks, can you find the finishing attack for black? How should black capture this bishop? The best move is rook takes g3 check, queen takes g3. We are finishing off the game by a series of forcing moves, but the next move is very important. Black to play. Please stop the video and find that great move for black that strengthens our attack against the white king with tempo. And you're a great player if you found the move bishop g5, hitting the queen, but also eyeing these ideas, right? If the queen moves, queen h3 check followed by bishop e3. This was the point of that move. Rook f2. What's our next move? Queen g3, of course. We are attacking the rook twice. If he does this, just mate in one. And after king h1, bishop takes f2. Black regains the material. Black has an extra pawn, in fact. But look at the white king. It's not about the pawns. It's about the attack. And basically, this is coming next. It's a crashing advantage for black, right? After queen g4 check, that's why Aronian went king h1, but this doesn't save him either. Bishop g5 paved the way for the move rook h3, and look at the black pieces, right? 3 attackers, maybe a single defender. It's very difficult to defend, right? With mating attack. The white king has no pawn cover, and the game is basically over. Queen d1, rook h3 check, bishop h2. Here, I want you to stop the video and find the mating blow, the mating attack for black, and you're a great player if you found the entire sequence, folks. Rook takes h2, king takes h2. What's the next move? Of course, bishop f4. We are talking about these two units as attacking pieces, and we are playing for mate, of course. What a beautiful mate in the end with queen h2, and we catch that king on g1. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, folks. I want to give you a system, a universal system that you can play against 1 g3, 1 knight f3, or 1 c4, right? That's a beautiful part of this reversed Botvinnik system. It's very solid. It's very nice in terms of strategic play. But you also need to know your weaknesses. For example, you're leaving that d5 outpost weak, but then you create so much play around that weakness, right? That's one advantage of accepting such openings like Stonewall Dutch, for example. You very early on accept long-term weaknesses, but then you know your middle game plans, right? You sort of making things easier on you, because once you deeply engage with those middle game ideas, there will be so many recurrent patterns that you'll be knowing what to do in those structures. That will give you a plan, for example, in terms of exchanges and so on, right? So it's a very nice, logical system opening for black, almost like a structure, I would say, rather than a single opening. And the basic ideas are there. Sometimes you can even play for a6 and b5s, but usually it goes like this, that you play f5 in those structures. All right, folks, the system is so rich that you can even play for the move d5, as Lenier Dominguez has played in this game. So probably that deserves a separate video as well. We can deepen our understanding of this reverse Botvinnik structures, show all the ideas, and deeply engage with those ideas by asking the why questions, as we always do in this channel. And if you have any questions to me, folks, please write to me. Have you played the system yourself? Do you have any experience also with white, with the Botvinnik system? And do you think that's a smart choice as well in terms of long-term repertoire that is based on understanding of the middle game structures rather than brute force memorization? Because this doesn't involve much memorization. You basically play for a system, right? It can come from different move orders. You have an idea of a system that you want to achieve a certain structure. As long as you know the pros and cons of that structure, as long as you deeply study that, then you will have an edge over your opponents. They will be seeing those structures a little bit less often as well, right? It's not the most common treatment, so to speak, against English for white. So that's a final advantage of this underappreciated system, because people look at those weaknesses and say, hey, black must be worse because he's giving this outpost to white, right? Things are far from clear. Just like Stonewall Dutch, that also gives so many weaknesses to white, but if black knows what they are doing, you can outplay so many people, given your chunks and patterns that you learned, right? They have a similar approach to this. I hope this will give you a nice idea for a repertoire, and please tell me if I should do more videos about this theme. Good luck, and thank you so much. Bye bye.